Do your arguing and your fighting and your compromising where your children can't hear it, because they can't take the weight of what they're hearing. They don't need to be hearing about your sex life. They don't need to be hearing about your finances. They don't need to be hearing about an extramarital affair. All right? That's way too much for them to carry. The number one thing that couples come to see me about is about communication. And I want to talk about that in the context of keeping our children safe and explain a little bit about why we get so ramped up. Now think about it. Maybe one or both of you work all day, or maybe one's at work and one's at home with the kids. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you're both spent. You only have so much energy and patience, and 8 or 10 hours later, most of that's gone. So you have to be strategic about how you engage one another. All right. So that's why you have such a short wick, because there's not much there left. You come home, and then you see that look, or the cabinet door is shut a little bit too hard. It doesn't take much. Or you hear a little bit of a tone. What was it? What did you mean by that? And now you're off. Now you guys are just going at it. All right. So be careful about that. When you come home, don't engage. It's not time to fight. It's time to relax, be with the family, have dinner. All right. Once your kids get put to bed, now you can go in your bedroom behind closed doors, go out in the garage. If you have a babysitter, or if they're old enough to take care of themselves or whatever, maybe you can go for a drive, or save it for the weekend, or save the talk for therapy. All right. But do it out of earshot of the kids. Because if you're saying things to hurt one another, these words of contempt, which, by the way, when you get in the realm of contempt, that's the number one predictor of divorce. Contempt is you're rolling your eyes and you're using that mocking tone and you're assassinating their character and you're saying the meanest things that you can because you've been mulling over that and you've been angry for so long and there's so much disdain. So when you get to that point and you're saying those mean things and your kids hear that, that's causing a huge insecurity in them, especially if you're saying things like, why don't you just leave? Or I'm going to get a divorce, even though you don't mean it. Because you're thinking, well, I always go back to my partner and I tell them, well, I didn't really mean it, I was just upset. And they can maybe rationalize through that, even though I guarantee you there's still some insecurity there. They at least can rationalize it and say, yeah, you were upset. Your kids, they don't get that. You don't ever tell them that. And even if you do, they're still not going to understand. They're still going to be worried about mom and dad breaking up. And what did I do to make them fight? They're going to blame themselves. You have to do these arguments outside of where your children can hear it. You need a safe word. So you start talking and you start getting triggered because you don't have a lot of patience or energy. You need to have a safe word. I always like to use the word aardvark. So you're going at it, aardvark. So that tells your partner, look, I still want to talk about this, but I'm getting ready to say something that I regret. Because what happens is when you get to that point where you're seeing red, you lose your logic center and you start going to this fight or flight mode. And that's when you start throwing everything in there. You're bringing in old content and you're talking about stuff that happened 10 years ago in an attempt to win the fight. Right? But the argument should never be about winning. It should be about negotiating and coming to compromise. All right. So you use the safe word. You separate for 20 to 30 minutes. That gives your bloodstream enough time to get rid of all that adrenaline. And so you can start thinking logically again. Then you come back and then you start talking. And you're talking and then you're actively listening. And then you're reflecting. So reflecting is your spouse tells you something. You tell them back what you just heard in your own words. That does two things. One, it either lets them know they heard me and they understood correctly, or they misunderstood and I need to tell them in a different way. So a lot of arguments get out of control just by misunderstanding. Well, that's not really what I meant. So that's what the active listening and reflecting does. It gives them a chance to clarify what was said. And you're speaking more rationally, your energy's a lot lower, and now you can come to compromise. So think about using a safe word. Only talk about one thing at a time. That's another thing that's important. If you're talking about bills and Jimmy's grades at school, and you got in a car accident that day, and you just pile all this stuff on, that's too much. You don't have the energy or the patience to go through that and to solve all those problems. Prioritize your problems and try to stay on point. All right. So, again, use the safe word. Separate for a little bit. Do your arguing and your fighting and your compromising where your children can't hear it, because they can't take the weight of what they're hearing. They don't need to be hearing about your sex life. They don't need to be hearing about your finances. They don't need to be hearing about an extramarital affair. All right. That's way too much for them to carry. All right. And it also keeps you from pulling them in and using them as pawns, which that's really bad. So remember, you want to fight in a way to where you're protecting your kids, because if they pick that up, they're going to model that behavior, and they're going to do that in their adult relationships, and they're going to repeat the pattern that you're in. And the idea of parenting is to put your children in a better position than you're in, right? My mom and dad did it a certain way, all right? And so the best that they do should be where I start off, and then I should grow from there. And the best that I become should be their lowest point, and they grow from there. And then we have exponential growth over 2 or 3, 4 generations. You become a completely different family, and you break those negative cycles. So that's just a few tips to help you protect your children when you're arguing. And if y'all are struggling with that, give me a call, shoot me an email. I'd love to talk to you about it. But until then, remember this: stronger relationships start here.